Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Scott Macbeth with Oracle Utilities. I'm here today with Mr. Brad Williams, Vice President of Industry Strategy for Oracle Utilities. Welcome, Brad.
Thanks, Scott. Glad to be here today.
Thank you for being with us today. So one of the things we want to talk about today is the environmental impacts that utilities are facing. It's a changing world and there's some big things that are impacting the way utilities operate. Can you expand on that for us?
Yeah, I think the first thing, generally utilities across the world have recognized the need to embrace sustainable growth strategies. And what I mean by that is there are certain areas that have been heavily impacted by drought, for example. So the water utilities in southwest US or used to be in Australia were heavily impacted by droughts and really raised the level of focus on sustainable growth policies. So how utilities manage these precious resources and how the consumers ultimately use them. And so the same thing with electric and gas is like we realize that what we have today is not an unlimited supply. So what we need to do is be much more conscientious of how we use these. And we've seen these with building policies, sustainable growth policies, smart cities, are all have this sustainability model as a center point or the foundation of where they're going with this. And when we start looking at distributed generation is one of the responses that utilities are bringing to the table to be able to support limited energy supplies. And we're finding that the consumers are embracing this at a faster rate than utilities are, to the point where your own home and your neighbors are putting up rooftop photovoltaic, so solar cells. So you're becoming your own energy plant for a large percentage of your energy needs. And in the same way, we see more water sustainability, so making sure you're very efficient in your use of water, even be able to collect rainwater and using that for irrigation or other sources of water needs for your building or for your home.
So necessity being the mother of invention, there's new technology, all these new technologies are out there to help the consumer deal with this and help the utilities deal with being able to supply their products. So what are the impacts to operations for utilities as we embrace these new technologies?
So yeah, there's a lot of impacts, and I do want to just take a minute and kind of review what some of these technologies are that are really impacting these utilities. So let's start with smart meters, because utilities have implemented a large number of smart meters over the past few years. And what the smart meters do for us is give us a much more granular view of the use of that precious resource. And if we have a better view, instead of having like just a monthly read of your total consumption for the month, we can look at hour by hour, minute by minute, and get a very quick view of how am I using that resource most effectively, and determine things like, do I have a leak in my house that I need to respond to before I see my monthly bill? What kind of things can I do to be more cost effective and more sustainable in my use of the energy. So another would be electric vehicles. Like we see a growth of electric vehicles as well, and what is the impact of that on our grid when we have a very large charging consumption by that electric vehicle, but also could be used as a resource back into the grid. And maybe it doesn't need to be charged as soon as I get home at the end of the day. Maybe I can set that charging time to be in the middle of the night when the impacts on the grid would be the least impactful. Some of the other things would be like other types of electricity storage, smart thermostats, and those types of things. So the impacts of utilities is we really need to understand what are they doing to our grid or to our distribution network by having these smart technologies. So I mentioned the electric vehicles having a very high charging consumption. So that actually could overload transformers, overload circuits if everybody started charging at the same time. Likewise, if it's a clear day and all of the rooftop solar plants are pushing power back in to the grid and our demand, our actual load is pretty low, then that's going to show a reverse power flow back into the grid, and that's could be equally disruptive if the utilities can't manage that. So I think that's really the challenge, is being able to have a good model of the network that would actually take into account all of the edge of the grid resources.
So what does Oracle Utilities have to offer to help utilities as well as consumers embrace this change in technologies and make it a solution, not a problem?
Well, yeah, so Oracle Utilities Network Management System is our solution in this space, where we start with that real-time model of the network and the model of the actual consumers, both from a load perspective and a resource perspective. So the consumer being could be a net generator back into the grid, as well as a consumer of the power. At any given time, it could change. So we got to start with more accurate models of the customers and these technologies that they have, and be able to aggregate those to the grid tie points. And with that, we can actually simulate and look ahead on what those impacts are and provide real-time and proactive and prescriptive optimization of the grid by leveraging this real-time model and real-time interaction with all these devices. If we look at what some of the current technologies are that support that, like traditional SCADA, we actually don't have a good model or a good view of what's happening at this edge of the grid, particularly these consumer-based energy technologies. We have limited visibility into that. So that's what we're offering, is full view of the network model, including the consumer energy technologies.
So as utilities now reach out into the edge of the grid, does that create a security issue for utilities?
I know it's a big issue with utilities that security needs to be addressed as part of the solution. And that's what Oracle provides with our Oracle Utilities Network Management System. Is we start with a solution that is built from the ground up with security in mind. And particularly if we're talking about interacting with the edge of the grid, communicating with these devices, then secure communications and authentication, making sure that the right person, valid user, valid system is actually doing this control is part of that interaction. And that's what we've done with a lot of other industries as well, is being able to control these distributed processes with these secure communication systems.
Interesting. So where have we seen successes in the industry where utilities have been able to adopt new technology, edge of the grid technologies into their processes?
Yeah, I think when we look at these areas that have very high adoption rate of rooftop solar, for example, consumer rooftop solar, California is one of the highest adopters in the mainland of the U.S. I think in Europe they have high adoption of solar. Hawaii, for example, has a very high, probably the highest penetration of rooftop solar of any utility. So our customers in these regions have been able to demonstrate some of these capabilities, and our ability to model and manage these end devices, these end consumer technologies as part of the grid operations have shown some very good success on being able to optimize those resources as part of the grid operations.
Well, it's really interesting to see how the change in technology has driven change in the utility industries. Thank you for sharing Oracle Utilities' approach with us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.